Search is no longer just about Google. Or once again, it's no longer just about Google. Generative AI tools like ChatGPT are redefining how people find information, and our work as SEOs is changing. According to Momentic's 2025 State of SEO Google versus ChatGPT report, ChatGPT users are now 2.3 times more likely to click through to external websites than Google users. And while Google still dominates our industry, user behavior is shifting at a very quick pace, and we need to take notice of this into how we're competing in search. So with that, this is the Voice of Search podcast. My name's Tyson, and joining us today is Tyler Einberger, who's co-founder and head of growth at Momentic. Tyler's here to talk to us about generative AI, LLMs, and a bit more about the study that him and his company produced. Welcome to the podcast, Tyler.
Thank you, Tyson. Really appreciate you inviting me here. Super excited to talk about what's happening in search and LLMs.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if I remember correctly, I came across one of your posts on LinkedIn. I was interested in the study, so I gave you a shout out to be like, hey, love to have you on the podcast. As we were talking, I found out you were also talking to Jordan, one of the other co-founders and hosts. So I'm happy to have you on here and, really diving in a bit deeper into the study that you've put together. So maybe with that, let's set the stage for the listeners or viewers as far as what is the study? What's the why behind it? And kind of, why did you see to embark on it?
Yeah, so the report, I like to call it a report just because I didn't put it in really hard. I put in a lot of time, but not a ton of hard different inputs. Really, I was using similar web clickstream data. And I did do some cleansing of some different tables. But for the most part, a lot of the data is straight up just from SimilarWeb. So it's a report. I guess it could be a little bit of a study, but I think the main piece that came out of it was, we've been hearing from different people online, or from our bosses or clients' bosses that hey, SEO is losing its luster. It's not, an attractive channel to invest in currently, and I think there's a lot of doomsday narrative that's out there, like Google search is dying, or ChatGPT is taking over. So I really wanted to get to the bottom of that question, but then from a broader perspective, I started this research because, if we're really heading towards a zero-click future, and if that's true, I think we need to shift our influence, our areas of influence from owned surfaces to, earned or maybe discovery surfaces. So I wanted to map out all of the places on the web where I think three things are true. And the first thing is, where are places that marketers can market and do marketing? And then second factor would be, what places where that's true can our audiences also okay with being marketed to or being influenced? And then the third requirement would be are these places measurable? Meaning from the outside looking in, and available through clickstream data, they have to be browser-based.
I appreciate that kind of almost taking a step back, because it's as practitioners, we get so focused into just more of, performance within one medium. And performance within that one medium isn't the best illustration of what like overall impact or performance is. So I think like that piece of, taking a step back really is helpful. And then really like that's like one of the benefits of clickstream data in my mind. Like, and I forget how many years back as I got access to a bunch of like jump shot data. And I had so much fun just like looking. And it was like at one point too, it was just like curiosity things that I was like, okay, well, like I wonder how many people went from this to this to this. But I do think like that's helpful to kind of broaden the lens versus just looking at like rank position or something like that. Maybe if you could elaborate a little bit more though on like the clickstream data. So I know you said similar web data was used for this. Like what was kind of like your methodology or approach for this report?
Yeah, absolutely. Love to dig into that. So we looked at US web users only, and the reason why I wanted to focus on users was there are plenty of reports that existed already from similar web clickstream data from other clickstreams that reported on visits, but I wanted to know like audience. Like if we're taking an audience first approach, thinking zero click, thinking the people that we're trying to connect with through our channel. That's why I looked at users. So I looked at them from February 2024, which is as far back as I could get data for, through March 2025. I've updated it since to include April and soon May. But the data comes from SimilarWeb's opt-in clickstream panel, which would be like millions of devices, and then also like supplemented with ISP provided data. We deduplicated some of the audience for certain views, especially when we're saying, hey, this many people or this many clicks per person happen. Like that's based on a deduplicated audience, which means, assuming that, I'm a user and I use Google at work on my desktop computer, but then I also use it on my mobile phone, that would be a duplicated user unless we were to deduplicate it. So I think SimilarWeb's doing some good stuff there to try to give us more representative, I won't say accurate, because I don't think we're in an era of accurate data, but representative data of what's actually happening. And then we took that data when we're looking at clicks out from Google, clicks out from ChatGPT. I wanted to scrub out self-referrals. And for Google, there weren't many self-referrals except for clicks within platform. But for ChatGPT, because of the URL structure and how clickstream works, I had to scrub out self-referrals, which was, like over 20% of the clicks that happen within ChatGPT.
That's interesting. Can you elaborate on the self-referrals a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah, so self-referral would mean, clickstream is based on, like a key piece of clickstream would be URL, anonymized URLs. So for ChatGPT, for example, a lot of the clicks that happen within platform are out to an open AI domain, whether it's to log in, whether it's to switch products to maybe operator, whether it's passing through some sort of you're logged in, but you still have to go through an auth. So those are self-referrals that we scrubbed out. With Google, we didn't really need to because it was based on domain-wide, so or subdomain-wide. www.google.com, which is 99% probably plus just Google search.
Diving into the report, I feel like one of the pieces most people want to know is what is, and we said it in the intro too, of like, ChatGPT users versus Google users, who's clicking through. So as marketers, we're interested in who's actually reaching our websites. Like, what's kind of from the high level as far as volume and also like percentage? Like, what'd you find as far as like referrals from each of these sources?
Something pretty surprising. I think the one thing that wasn't really obvious before finding this was, hey, like there's a lot more people clicking out from ChatGPT than we thought. And I think that's a big thing. So if we're talking about, numbers, what the data is telling us is that ChatGPT is the March number was 2.3 times better at sending out people to other websites than Google, which was extremely surprising because Google's main
Wow.
revenue comes from sending people to websites.
And within this, is this counting both organic and paid?
Yeah. Yeah, this is not
Wow.
this is agnostic for sure. So that was
Interesting.
surprising. And I think there's important things to consider when we're talking about the accuracy of this data. What SimilarWeb will say is, typical sampling swing is, plus minus 30%. If I look at SimilarWeb data for a website that I have access to, their analytics, it's more like plus minus 10 to 15. So it's a little bit tighter than they allow for. But I treat these numbers directionally instead of absolute truths. But I think with clickstream data, not just SimilarWeb, there's a really big blind spot, and this is going to be website traffic that comes from apps. So I think that's an important thing to consider, because if we're just considering website traffic that comes from the open web or a browser-based measurable, then we're leaving out a huge chunk of the picture, especially with ChatGPT on mobile.
Interesting. So, correct me if I'm wrong. So, from that, within this, we would not see if I open up ChatGPT app on my phone and then I'm going and visiting, or similarly, would it also not capture if I'm going through like the Gemini app?
Yeah. So Gemini,
I guess true.
I can't speak to Gemini because I haven't really looked at how. Well, actually, I'm not sure if Gemini gives you links to other websites. I'm not sure about that. But with ChatGPT, yeah, like you're sort of right, because the intent is actually there within ChatGPT to pass along UTM source. It's like the worst, not the worst, but it's a pretty bad UTM structure that they've implemented. But some pretty broad and some broad testing on my end, and I don't have anything formal yet. But it's like 1 in 10 URLs that are clickable within ChatGPT contain the UTM. So we're talking about 90% of clicks out when you're in the app experience are coming through to your analytics as direct, because that referring source isn't passed through when you're in the app.
When I first went through the study too, I was like, okay, the over 2% or over 2 times caught my attention. I was like, that's interesting. We know it's been rising at like an alarming rate, so it's already on people's radars. But then I'm just pulling up kind of like the report again over here, and if I'm looking at like the April numbers that you shared with me prior, it's like, yeah, Google's still like significantly larger, where it was like, 25, I think it was 173 million. And then in ChatGPT, I'm looking at like, let's round up like 70 million. But without the app component, like that's going to make it a lot closer, because I know just for myself, like I never access ChatGPT through like the browser on my phone. It's always through the app. And if you look at like total amount of desktop versus mobile, I would assume, it's not going to be probably over 50%, but I would assume maybe, and this is a complete guess, but I would assume probably around 40%, maybe 30% of ChatGPT's activity is happening on an app base, whether it's app within like the operating system, because I also use ChatGPT within the app quite a bit more than I would in the browser at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like regardless if anyone was doubting, it's clearly a player that we need to kind of prepare, align to. Clearly there's a bunch of Google announcements recently, which is kind of like following that similar direction. But like,
Yes.
What else within this report too kind of like really surprised you or like caught your attention?
Yeah. Well, I think, first to call out like the discrepancy in like app-based activity for ChatGPT, like it's pretty obvious in the data. Like according to SimilarWeb Clickstream, 82% of ChatGPT users are on desktop. That's not correct. There's no way that's correct. And that's where like the key gap is like really the key gap that we are talking about with mobile app being dark in Clickstream data. Like there's no way that 18% of ChatGPT usage is on mobile. Like that's got to be false. So yeah, to close that loop, but I think that there's the users click out to other websites 2.3 times more than Google's audience is still at least 6 times bigger within browsers than ChatGPT. Again, we're not talking about visits; we're talking about people. I think another thing that's not obvious in the report, but still comes out, is that Google's U.S. audience is pretty close to the maximum that it can be, given U.S. Census data on adults in the United States. So it's pretty clear that they have to play defense, and to avoid erosion, they have to make sure that people use Google as much as possible. So that could explain some of the AI moves that we're seeing that seem like they're kind of off the cuff or rushed with AI overviews, with AI mode launch. Yeah, it's kind of wild. I think another thing that was pretty obvious, and I think a lot of people assume this, was that Google is kind of forcing people to stay within or nudging users to stay within Google search to answer queries. And that's evident by, on average, per session. Now, this is now looking at traffic, not users. Per session or per visit to Google search, users are now clicking on average over 10 times across devices, over 10 times per visit, which is kind of wild.
Dang.
And I think 2 years ago that was, under 8.
Wow, that is a great call out. And it's like kind of similarly, that was one of the pieces that jumped out to me is great. Google has this leg up from like a volume again perspective, but it was in the report too, you were showing that it was like, I think it was like 970% increase of like clicks going out, which, some of that could be user behavior, some of it could be growth to the platform. But like, do you have a comparison of like the increase in clicks out versus like user growth? Like, because to me, that was kind of what I'm learning. I'm like, okay, clearly ChatGPT is moving more users along. They're also acquiring a lot more users. So is it like, is the growth being more fueled from behavior or users, new users?
Well, I think the third piece that we could add in there is product features. So the most obvious thing that I see is that since the launch of Search GPT, I think it was originally called, since the launch of that I think the public launch was in October of last year, we've seen growth in clicks, obviously, out to other websites at a higher rate. The multi-100% increase year over year, I think that's not really indicative, or it's not even tied to user growth. It's more indicative of feature launch. But ChatGPT is growing at a really high rate. I think it's over 80% in users year over year. And then, choose your source for just visits growth, which is not included in here, but visits growth is off the charts too. So people are coming back within a month or a reporting period, often to use ChatGPT multiple times in a reporting period.
Interesting. And okay, so selfishly speaking, have you thought for future iterations of this report? So it's not obviously anything that's already been captured, but looking at, have you thought of or have you played around with adding in Perplexity, Claude? Like, as I went through it too, I was like then wondering like, okay, yeah, these are the two primary players, but like, how about those fringe kind of like on the peripheral players as well?
Yeah,
I know, and also from that, like David's a huge Claude like proponent. So
yeah. I do have this data. I have not released it yet. Yeah, so this is like I mentioned before, like this is part of like a bigger project, and like the biggest thing that stood out to me that I could deliver and provide value to the community was this specific thing. Now we do have other data too. And I think, other people have called out the fact that like Bing search is like really, really struggling right now. And that correlates with ChatGPT growth as well as Copilot release on a subdomain. But yeah, we have data for, so in that data set, that like representative group that represents the three things that we're looking out for a marketable web. I call it influenceable web right now is my working title for the group of websites. But all the web accessible LLMs are in there, including crossovers like Perplexity, which would be search plus LLM. Perplexity is a lot smaller than we think it is, at least for me. A lot smaller than what I would assume a company valuated at the amount that they're valued at would be in users.
Anything that you can share further about the larger project? Like, I mean, I feel like at this point there's probably a fair amount of listeners that are, intrigued, wanting a little more, like maybe just like setting expectations of when people could expect to see more kind of these other components that you referenced.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one, and I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but the biggest thing for me is that the influenceable web is eroding or decreasing in users by 3 to 4% per year over the past few years. So that's a big takeaway. It doesn't mean that audiences are going away on these places. It means that measurable audiences are going away. I think it means that people are, the most obvious answer would be that people are just moving to app experience, right? So they're not going to come through in this type of data. But the usage of LLMs is huge. Adoption of anything outside of ChatGPT is super small. Gemini is hard to measure because you could say that AI overviews are part of Gemini or AI mode. That's going to come through as happening in the Google ecosystem instead of the Gemini subdomain. But that's small. But it's a top 3 LLM And then Claude, which is my favorite, to be honest, in use, personal use, is a lot smaller. I think it's like it drops to 4th or 5th place in the list. DeepSeek, which is one that got a ton of attention after they went viral, earlier this year. They've been decreasing at a heavy rate since that viral peak. So that's something to also consider. I'm curious what happens when they release something notable again, if that usage from people spikes. But then also, I think a bigger trend that we're seeing is that overlap users totally exist. So if you're using ChatGPT, you're really likely to be using other LLMs too. And then if we apply that to Google search, I think a really interesting thing is that, yes, people who use Google search, people who use ChatGPT have, close to 100% overlap with Google search. So there's not really any exclusive users of ChatGPT. But if we flip that around and look at Google's shared users with ChatGPT, that number is increasing at probably a scary rate for Google.
Going back a minute, what is it about Claude that you like the best? Because I mentioned to David Bell, one of the other co-founders of Previsible, like he's been banging that drum for a minute, and I've been a little more hesitant to move over. What is it about that system that you're enjoying more?
Yeah, I think it's important to call it system because I like the company too. But if we focus on the system, it feels more human to me. So when I'm interacting with Claude, it feels less like a yes man and more like a helpful person. And that's the primary thing. And then if say you use it to like draft an email or something, I find out that the output is I have to edit it less from Claude's models. And I started really liking Claude around 3.5, which they're now at Opus 4, I believe, or Sonnet 4. So around 3.5, things started to get really good for me. And I felt more of and I know we're not supposed to humanize, LLMs and bots, but it felt more human and it felt like I enjoyed interacting with it more. I don't like the interface more. I don't like the usage limits more, but the output and quality seems to be higher quality.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to play down it a little bit, but yeah, maybe I should kick the tires a little bit more. With that, though, this is going to kind of bring us to the lightning round of the interview. Nice. And so I'm going to be throwing a few kind of more short form questions at you. There'll be a theme kind of to each, and we can kind of riff on it, and we'll move on to each one. First one, buy or sell. Are you buying or selling that clickstream data will be one of the most useful data sources moving forward?
You might expect me to say buy, but I'm going to sell this one.
Really?
Well, I think that, so from one perspective, plus minus 10 to 30% accuracy that's a pretty big chunk. But it's good for directional use, good for, 30,000 foot views, not good for precision, but what is. But it's also, there's so many limitations. Like if a website doesn't hit the, a large quantity of traffic that monthly, like it might not be picked up well by clickstream panels. What I would buy is a package of clickstream. And I think clickstream helps us see where the market is heading. And then something more like first party data helps us to measure how we're performing in that market. But I would buy a package of clickstream platform data plus our dark horse here, server logs. And I think server logs are really, really helpful because there's a lot that user agents can tell us about who and what is accessing our website.
Especially like, I don't know, from like, it feels weird saying this, but like traditional SEO, like any enterprise website, it's like that would be one of my like top stops as far as looking for improvements, is understanding, you know, where Googlebot's spending time. And I don't think I've seen many enterprise, like large websites that don't have room for improvement of improving kind of crawl efficiency. I wouldn't say bloat, but more of like crafting where they're spending time. So I like that. I like that answer there. Next one, crystal ball. So we're looking ahead into the future on this one. How do you see zero-click searches evolving with AIO and LLMs on the rise?
Well, I think the future is already here. Is piece number one. I think it's going to zero click is going to continue to increase as far as like reality goes. One of my favorite things to talk about is the lack of data as someone who does SEO. The lack of data that we get from our platforms and our analytics, and the level of triangulation that needs to happen in order for us to even communicate value to a CFO. But I think that between users staying in platform in Google, and with, say, LLMs do end up sending a ton of traffic, and it's high quality traffic, but there's no referrer data, so we're missing that. So it still looks like zero click to us unless we're capturing and including direct traffic in our organic figures, which sometimes we do. We're measuring a shrinking slice of reality that I think translates to zero click. So I think a lot of stuff is going to be blamed on zero click, but I do think it's reality.
Fair enough. Toss up. If you had to choose, would you optimize for AI or traditional search?
So I actually don't think this is mutually exclusive. Technical hygiene, brand mentions, backlinks, chunking, micro passages, whatever, a query fan out or topics or topic clustering. I think that these things work everywhere. So I don't think we can choose one or the other. I think what helps, the LLMs or agents or any other bot cite you, that probably helps humans find you too. So I don't think there's like a huge difference between the two. There are the minor differences that we're seeing, and I think it's an evolving thing too. And I could be totally wrong about this.
No, have you found yourself, which I guess for the record, I totally agree with that, because it's like you have a lot of fundamental technologies that have been in use for a while, and it's more of that last kind of interaction point. But like, have you found yourself shifting priorities as far as like you go through, you identify 100 items that could be improved? Are you shifting focus or priorities of how you'd weight certain factors? Like, is it maybe a simpler way of asking, are you shifting strategy more from this?
I would say yes and no. So the yes piece is we're starting to include this type of thinking, specific to optimizing for LLMs, or even better yet, thinking about the future beyond that, which is optimizing for agents, right, or machines. So what pieces need to be in place for that to be something that we would be considered as a good source for in the future? So, I mean, like a really concrete example would be, hey, this is something that makes me elevate, client side and rendering on a website to a higher priority for an engineering team to switch to server side rendering, because LLMs and conversational search outside of Gemini or Google don't render JavaScript. So if that's part of our, if our audience is on using LLMs and we think they're using LLMs to find our product or service or comps, then that's definitely a technical SEO item that I would normally have as a medium high or high to a very high, if that's a priority for the business.
I like it. I'm particularly interested too in like, as these other competitors start adding crawling and indexing independently. So it's like ChatGPT's using Bing's index, Perplexity. Okay, they have their own. But I feel like that's going to be interesting of once the almost like collection becomes more unique or differentiated. Like then I feel like we're going to see even more shifts in how you would, focus. But I'm with you on this one where it's like a lot of the fundamentals that we've been using are still in play and still valuable. It's more of where and how you want to compete for me that it's like evolving quickly is the preciseness of where you want to put your efforts seems to be evolving quicker than the actual tactics of website implementation.
Yeah, and measurement. So I think measurement's so far behind. The tools are obviously behind. Like, there's a ton of tools popping up for like track your visibility and LLMs, but it's missing such a key piece. All of those tools, which is actual usage of the LLM for the topics that are tracked there. So I think that's a key missing piece right now, and that's something that I'm weary about. But there's also not a better method unless you want to manually build a list of here's all the URLs on my website that get traffic from LLMs that I know that aren't hidden, in direct or dark, and then try to reverse engineer, likely topics that drove people to these URLs, and then build out likely questions from that. Like, that is a ton of work and still not representative of actual usage. So we don't get data from LLMs on usage. We don't get data from risk right now.
100%. And it's like, we could probably do a whole nother thing on just like reporting and tracking, but I feel like we need to take a completely different paradigm shift, because this like reporting of ranking positions, even share of voice in a lot of ways, to me feels like there's use cases from the competitor standpoint, but it's limited of how much it's going to change your acts and your like tactics, which is like at the end of the day, that's where the focus needs to be, because that's where you're going to see a change. Just looking at, are you in position 10 or position 5 is like, I don't know. Yeah, I could go on that one for a minute, but
Same.
on to the next one. What's the word? So we're looking for one word to kind of encompass this. What is one word you would use to describe the competition between Google and OpenAI?
Misleading from multiple perspectives. So from one perspective, Google has the audience distribution, they're pushing AI mode. I think it's going to be, I never give predictions, but I feel really good about this one. I think that AI mode being default in Google search is closer than we think, or some version of it. I think we have, as an industry or solo practitioners or agencies, probably about a year before things really get get shaken up. But so that's coming fast. ChatGPT isn't a search product. Like, it has search features. I would expect, just from a business perspective, OpenAI to really lean in and try to capture enterprise. Like Claude and Anthropic have done that since the beginning. I would expect ChatGPT to focus there, or OpenAI to focus enterprise. But I think OpenAI saw, where an LLM can provide a good search experience and release that product. But I think that over time, what will probably happen is Google still owns consumer AI, and search entirely or mostly. I don't know what it means for websites. I do know the direction things are heading, which would be agentic experiences. Just look at e-commerce and what's happening there. Visa partnering with OpenAI on agentic shopping. Google also announcing at I/O agentic shopping features. Like, there's a race to the bottom here in optimizing or automating user experience in decision making. I wouldn't expect that to stop. But from another lens, you said before that ChatGPT uses Bing's index. Another misleading thing is, did you know that ChatGPT also uses Google search? And what I will do to expand on that is say that at least for scheduled tasks, and I would encourage people to test this out, is to set up a scheduled task to run, every day. I have one that's scheduled every hour, which is how I was able to find this. And it pings my website for a very specific search query that no one would ever search. And then I can see in Google Search Console the search queries that OpenAI or ChatGPT is using through Google Search to look for this scheduled task, which is pretty wild to me.
I have heard that. I mean, I think we may have chatted about that earlier as well, which is like, I mean, that's like a whole new can of worms, which I feel like, I don't know, you can put on the tinfoil hat and the conspiracy theories.
Oh, I love doing that, yeah.
But not too long ago, there was a change on, Google all of a sudden starting to tighten down on the crawling and scraping, and everyone was like pointing the finger at like the rank tracking tools of like SEMrush, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, Google doesn't care about that. Like, that they are small players in this larger ecosystem. But I don't know. If I was to go on the limb, I would say like Google probably cares a lot more about ChatGPT using their index or scraping information from them more than any of these SEO tools.
Yeah, unless they're using an API and paying Google. So does Google win no matter what? Is that the misleading thing? Or is it, it's something else? But crawling and indexing, I spoke with my friend. I have a really close friend who works SEO for one of the biggest websites that exists. And they're seeing right now just huge, massive slowdowns in crawling. And then what looked like better indexation initially, now things are starting to free fall from the indexation perspective. So what I'm really curious to know then is what happens from performance and performance perspective. Does that result in less people going to the website? So that, I think for that website specifically, that could tell, be a good bellwether to what might happen to other websites.
Very interesting. We got one more. Last one, trend or trash. Is optimizing content specifically for AI summarization a legitimate strategy, or is it misguided?
I think there's different ways to approach this, but to pick one, let's call it trend. So I think a key piece to this outside of the tactics like chunking or query fan out or whatever you want to call them, if like in creating LLM bait, so to speak, if you have original data, maybe some proprietary insights, expertise in the field, using that as like the key background to content, your key pillars behind content that you're producing, I think that's a long-term trend. On the other hand, on the flip side, I think if you're just mass producing consensus content just to play catch up, or if you're approaching SEO as a hey, let's just take the best competitive strategies and replicate, I think that's going to be something that's trash.
Well, that's gonna wrap up this episode of the podcast. Thanks again to Tyler Einberg for joining us. And I feel like I could have continued this conversation much longer, but I've kept Tyler a little bit too long. If you'd like to get in touch with Tyler, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in the show notes, or go on over and check out his company's website at momenticmarketing.com. Also, be sure to check out the kind of local meetup group in Milwaukee's Digital Marketing Club. We're going to be doing some stuff with them in the near future. If you would like to subscribe and you want a daily stream of SEO and content marketing knowledge, so hit that subscribe button in your podcast app or on YouTube, and we'll be back in your feed in the next following day. And that is all for today. Thanks for stopping by The Voice of Search, and we will see you in the next episode.